crunches numbers. He's worth $50 million. I'm like, tell me, do you feel rich? And he paused for a really long time. And he's like, you know what, Selena, maybe when I hit 100 million, that'll be the time I feel rich. And I'm bringing that up not because his answer surprised me, it's because it didn't. It's like the goalpost moves. And so he was still the kid who had no money. He just now changes the group he compares himself with.
You're listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to championing everyday men and supporting you in getting more from life, love, and the everyday. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and the aim of this podcast is pretty simple: to support you in building rock-solid foundations, legendary integrity, and kick-ass relationships with plenty of stories, a load of lessons, and a solid dose of some loving straight talk. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to not just another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast, but number 50. Yes, you can send me your applause, but I am taking a little moment here to pat myself on the back. 50 episodes. Okay, fucking dope. Let's create 50 more and then go from there. Hey, thank you to all of you listeners who come here regularly. I appreciate you. The show wouldn't exist without you guys. Thank you to my support, the people in and around the show, Mr. Dan Rave, who is the audio genius, Carissa, who helps out with a lot of the social pieces that a lot of you guys watch on socials, and to all the guests that have joined me. Thank you so much. It is an honor to sit down and talk either to myself for some solo shows or to some of the guests that I have on. I get to talk to cool people. I mean, that's kind of one of the pieces of having a podcast. It's certainly for you guys listening. Please always open the feedback on the kind of topics that you want to hear, the kind of people that you want to hear. Send them in. Email me, support@mikecampbell.com.au. You can find that on my website, all the things. Reach out to me, DM me on Instagram. I'm happy and keen to hear what you guys want to hear, topics, etc., as well as guests. So let's get on to this week's guest. This week's guest is Selina Gray. Selina is an absolute badass when it comes to money. That is not her title, but that's what I have titled her with. And I'm actually looking forward to working with her coming up very soon. So maybe I can do a solo episode on money in a little while once I've done some work with her. But I didn't bring Selina on because she's going to be coaching me. I brought her on because she's an absolute badass with money, and I have the privilege of knowing her. I have met her. She's Canadian, but I have met her through a very good friend of ours who has worked with her and had some amazing things to say. And I've also witnessed her working as well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the episode by and large speak for itself, but I want to read a little bit from the top of her bio on her website, a little about me, and it starts here, and we will explore this in the episode. I had an unhealthy obsession with money and numbers. So I'm going to stop there very quickly. That might be you. Maybe not an unhealthy obsession, but what you might have is a preoccupation with providing, working to try and create more financial security. Claim, get, chase more money. That might speak to some of what Selina is going to speak to in this episode. So we'll continue. I had an unhealthy obsession with money and numbers. I got my CPA, Chartered Professional Accountants, designation, and I worked 120-hour work week. I mean, how the fuck do you even do that? Across 12 countries. Oh, well, she worked all the time. She slept on the couch in her office with a team of 30 finance ninjas. There was no stopping my pursuit to be powerful and incredibly wealthy. I was choosing work above friends and family. I was buying luxury brands to fill a void. My life was centered around praise, power, and money. And I felt empty. Let's revisit that. I was buying luxury brands. You might fill in anything else. I was putting money here in order to try and take care of something over here, fill a void. My life was centered around praise, power, and money. I felt empty. I began feeling really unwell, and in 2011, I ended up with a lengthy hospital stay and an autoimmune diagnosis. Now, there is a lot that goes on from there, both in her bio and her story, and we do explore this in the episode. We look at the idea around money, the stories that we have around money, this idea as men, that we need to provide, what that even means, what that looks like, and the provider energy that we step into. We explore the whole idea of financial security. More financial security equals more security, what the fuck is that even? And therefore we start to look at, is it actually trying to make up for our insecurities and this whole subject of enoughness? If I have enough, I will feel like I am enough, safe enough, secure enough. So we're going to dive into all of that. There is so much gold in here. And this is an hour-long conversation that we could have 10 times over and still go into new areas and new depths. I cannot wait for you to hear this episode with Selina. Again, thank you for those who, if you're new here, hi, stick around, come say hello, subscribe, come here every week when I post new episodes. And if you've been here for a while, I appreciate you. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. We're 50 in. Let's roll. And into the show. Selina, welcome to the Everyday Legends podcast. Great to have you here.
Oh, I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, now let's talk money and perhaps all the things around that. But before we dive into that, listener, you've heard a little bit of the introduction, and so now I want to get to know Selina a little bit. There's a chance that some people who listen to this already know you, but where I want to come in a bit of an intro, let's learn a little bit more about you. Situation is this: you can take this wherever you like, and that is, who is Selina Gray?
That's a beautiful question. I would candidly say a woman who's a recovering perfectionist with a heart on fire, who's here to share lessons learned to help humans live in more peace around money and create richness in their life beyond numbers. I'm a mother who's walking and healing her own maternal legacy. I'm a friend who has needed to upgrade boundaries, who's chosen to do so and found more richness in my life because of it. I'm an avid cheerleader, fiercely competitive gal who wants to make the most of this one precious life.
Wow. Thank you. What an introduction and wonderful exploration into that sentence. And, like, obviously when we say, who are you? Often the words that start are I am, right? And anything that come after those words are fairly powerful, and they are identifiers. And maybe we might get into that a little bit throughout this whole conversation. One of the things that I know a little about you is, some of the history, let's say. And so I'd love to explore that a little bit. And there's a line that I've, seen from you, and it's this: I had an unhealthy obsession with money and numbers. So can you talk us through that? And also, to your eyes, and someone who clearly had a lot of experience, and we might learn a little bit about that, what is, quote, an unhealthy obsession with money and numbers?
Because I'm going to take you way back. When I grew up in a small town in Canada, I grew up to a teenage mom, and my dad was young, and they really felt like money was a taboo topic. And I always loved money. I always wanted to talk about it. My mom would be chatting in story and she would say, I bought this for $20. I'm like, no, Mom, it was 1947. And so I was always precise, and I loved to speak about money, and it was just like inherent in me. And so when I started doing my dad's bookkeeping records for his small business at the age of 12, I remember every year meeting
for fun, or that was like, oh, you're really good with numbers.
For fun.
Yeah.
Like, I was such a nerd. I loved it.
But you were also seriously doing, like, that was the task in the business was yours.
Yeah. So before that, I was finding random things around the house to sell to my neighbors until they started hiding from me when I would walk up the drive, And so my dad was like, okay, you like numbers, because I was always talking about numbers, always like find ways to earn money. He's like, you're going to be my bookkeeper. And so I did that. So every year I'd meet with the CPA, the chartered professional accountant, and I really liked her. She seemed like she knew a lot of things, and she got to meet a lot of business owners, and I got hooked. I was like, I'm going to become a CPA. And I did. I started articling for a small accounting firm in high school, and I loved sport and all of the things, but I just was like, I feel like this is going to take me overseas. And that was ultimately my dream. I wanted to travel through business. And so I did that. And so my pursuit with numbers was that I was good at it. So it became my profession. And at the age of 21 or 22, I became a controller of a publicly traded international oil and gas company.
Right.
And I started working overseas and working a lot and realized that my numbers obsession, really took flight from there. I was earning a lot and I was living a high-flying lifestyle, flying overseas, and everything became about numbers in my life. Like friends would get married and I wouldn't show up because I'd have to work. I was at the airport buying myself luxury goods. I was always like checking into my bank accounts. And I had created this obsession for myself that at the age of 30, I wanted to become a CFO. I would have enough money to retire and then I would be happy. So the long-winded opening to what is the unhealthy obsession was this lifelong, up until that point, review that numbers and money equaled power, which equaled freedom. And there was like this inherent pursuit in me to kind of bypass the joy of now for the freedom of tomorrow. And how that ended up taking a sideline for me was at 28, I was working in my office in Tunisia and I passed out. And my team, I came to, my team was around me. They're like, Miss Selena, are you okay? And I wasn't okay. I ended up flying home to Calgary in Alberta, where I was living at the time. And I stayed in the hospital for 22 days. I ended up with a pretty serious autoimmune disease and I nearly died. It was, not eating for 11 days. Like it was serious stuff. It was next level. And I remember the very first thing asking my doctor was, when can I get out of here? I need to get on a plane. I need to get back to work.
Yeah.
And he's like, Selena, you're not getting on a plane. Like the medications you require, no, you're not doing that. And I felt like my life was over. And the first thing I thought about was, this is going to cost me everything. And I meant it in a power money way, not like, oh my gosh, I'm unhealthy. I was so clouded by the numbers. And so that's really where the wake up call began with the obsession. Up until that point, it was just my way of life. And
it was oxygen, right?
Oxygen, exactly.
Wow, that is 22 days. And then this is going to cost me everything, which what I'm kind of hearing in that as well is like everything that feels solid to me, which is the money, the job, the where that's taking me, the path, right? So okay, what happens next?
Well, I go into darkness because that's what one does when your entire value system is based on external factors. So first thing that happens, my HR human resources group takes me aside and says, Selena, we would like to offer you your high six-figure salary on a long-term disability basis. And I probably say, no, thank you. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to do this on my own. And say no. So they let me go. And I decide that I'm going to get myself healthy so I can get back to work. And I proceed to keep spending like I always had, and really just reading lots of books to try to fix, the air quote, fix what's ever wrong with me so I can get back on my path.
In terms of on your condition?
Exactly. I was like, I'm just going to get myself fixed so I can get back to work, because that's all I wanted at the time.
Yeah.
And I realized within 90 days, I had gone through like $50,000 worth of my savings, because all I did was go buy things and, eat the fancy meals and do all the things that I had been doing in my past life that was expensible in my corporate job. And I realized I was really unhappy and I wasn't feeling any better. So I started reading literature that I would kind of put into some categories that led me to the path of wealth consciousness. And I ended up flipping a quarter. And I was like, I need to get out of this town, because everyone who would see me were like, why aren't you overseas? Like, what are you doing? And I felt so worthless just being at home, doing nothing. So I flipped a coin. What city am I going to move to? One way said this, the other that. And I ended up moving to a new city and starting my own business around relationship to money, because I started realizing that my reaction to money was really unhealthy. And I was starting to realize I was hanging out with a lot of people who felt the very same way. And in my new city, there's a lot more calm around money. And so I started interviewing everyone. I started interviewing people from my past life who was worth, several millions, some of them billions, and regular people who had negative amounts of money, and realized it's not just a me thing. There's lots of layers to this money topic, and I haven't looked back since. It's been truly like my life's work, and that was over a decade ago now.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for taking us into some of that. What a powerful story and situation. And as you said there, I think this topic of money is going to relate to many people. But even that aside, on a broader context, you said something there. You entered into the darkness, which you kind of have to do if your entire value system is externally based, and then essentially gets flipped on its head, right? All of a sudden there's kind of nothing left to stand on, which is almost what you were saying in the earlier piece as well. Sounds like that was incredibly challenging, but ultimately very enriching, and that's, I'm sure, a term that we might explore. So then, can you talk us through, because I see a lot of things play out around money and wealth and worth and value for men, and often what, to my understanding, may sit at the base of that, first and foremost, are the stories that we hold around money. Yeah. So can you kind of talk us through, and maybe this might speak to some of your own examples, but more so, so what are some of these stories that we tend to have around money? That's somewhat limitless, but I'm sure there's some pretty common ones that are really foundational. And like, how are we getting these? What do we do about it?
Yeah, I love this question as well, because I had no context for why my entire value system was driven externally. And so when it's
just what it was, like, it was just the oxygen, right? It was just that thing.
Yes, exactly. I love that frame of reference, because it was just breathing air. Of course, I would do this. And there's so many layers to it. And so I want to preface by saying, I had the absolute gift to work with thousands of people now, and there's some distinctive patterns that I've witnessed and then helped people walk through. So I want to identify kind of a core subject for me, which is to feel liberated with money, which in my definition is to be set free. And when we think of money, we think of it as, like, of course, the currency in which we have to live in a society. There's a lot of pressure from society around, like, having more money and resulting in more freedom. And I think that there's lots of layers to that. But one thing that I've really noticed in my interviews and working with lots of clients has been three distinctive things. Number one, that in our past, we interact with money in ways that live in our subconscious mind that really need to be tapped into in order to understand the present in which we actually have the active working relationship with money. So then, of course, that leads us to living the most fulfilled, enriching life into our future, where the legacy we want to leave is very intentional. So to me, when I think about, what is the subject matter of money, it goes into identity work. So first and foremost, it's defining the relationship. We're very used to defining different forms of relationships. Some of us aren't as used to saying, I have a relationship with money. Like, if you're hearing that and you feel like something come up in your body, it's a beautiful invitation to explore. Because for me,
I have a relationship to money? It's just this thing. It's a need.
And my definition of that would be that everyone's relationship is unique, like a fingerprint, and it's based on your past interactions and experiences. Like, everyone has a memory around money that's positive and negative, and that really shapes who we are in the present. And I'll give a very simple example. So if you go to the grocery store and you reach for maybe your favorite kombucha, but it's not on sale, and then you're like, oh, you know what? I'll just get this other kind to this because it's like $3 cheaper. And in that moment, it's like, is that your liberated truth around this purchase? So it's stopping the auto programming, the unconscious around money, and starting to lead with intentionality. there's nothing wrong with buying anything on sale. Like the relationship to money is unique to you for a reason. It's just often there's so much programming from the past that we've created neural pathways around money that aren't our own. And so at the end of the day, it's like, do you want your favorite brand of kombucha to enjoy, or is it worth it to you to save the money? And for most people, it's not a thought. It's just an action based on past experiences. And that's a very silly example, but it can go all the way up to like fearing saving for retirement or what that might mean, or having an awkward conversation with a spouse because you hiding the debt and now it's time to get married and you're like, oh my gosh, it's gone too far. And often for men, what I witness so often is this really identity around being a provider and the pressure that comes with, and not feeling safe to have the conversations that money really brings up emotion. It brings up emotion for us all, but especially I've witnessed for men, it's not safe to have feelings around money. We have to bury those feelings, and then we tend to explode around money. And we often attract an opposite money story in our partnerships, meaning one's a spender or a saver, and we can have those explosive conversations. And so ultimately, like through the realm of money, it's learning to see it as a relationship, to walk in the automated truths of, is this what I want? And finding a way to walk out in liberation in small things and in big things.
Yeah, and I, can already sense how much that can potentially bring up. Like, what, money's one of those things that other people have. Money's one of those things that doesn't stick around. That if you've got money, it's because you got it in terrible ways, or so many things that come up. And then to this piece about being a provider, right? Well, it's just one of those giant things that I take on, and that word providing is carries weight, right? And I see that play out in so many ways for guys. But one of the, I think, simplest ways, or perhaps the ways in which we have oversimplified our role as a man, is to be the provider, and that has some real deep truth, and also some ways that have been learned, but often very central to that, and almost entirely isolated to, is money. We often forget or don't understand that providing can be other things. So we have this one task, which is my job is to provide money, and the term that might then come with that is financial security. And pressure. Sorry, where you go?
And pressure and lack of safety, and not having the safe space to have conversation. And this is what I witness often, is just this idea that provider equals this, and there's no room for relationship to money conversations, that it's unique to my own relationship. How it's just, this is the definition of provider, let me execute from that. And it narrows our worldview. When we're focused, like in my life, it really narrowed my worldview. I was like, when I get to this point, then I can be free, instead of saying like, let me actively live in freedom to create the life I want. And I want to use a client example around this, where, a situation where a couple had moved in together, and there was little to no conversation around how the bills would be kind of sorted out. It was just like, we're a couple, you moved in with me, I'm going to keep paying the bills. And this resentment started growing, but there wasn't any safe space to have the conversation. And then that permeated into his business, whereby like he was doing well, but just well enough and sabotage debt patterns, etc. So when we started getting the layers of this, it was like, what's happening here? And a couple of things came out. So I was like, what's happening with the business? And he's like, doing well enough. I'm like, okay, what does it mean to be doing well enough? Well, I'm providing what I need to be. Like, what does that mean? And if we don't get specific around it, richness always stays vague, because it's just like we're going through the motions of someone else's life. So we started carving out, what does it mean to grow the business? Like, if you're putting this much energy, shouldn't we see the financial return? So when we got into the layers of it, there was one specific story that came out, and I said, okay, what would happen if your business was wildly successful? And we put some numbers to it that I could tell made him visibly uncomfortable. Like, speak to this discomfort with me. What's going on? And he's like, fuck, I grew up knowing that rich people were not good. And so I struggle with that. I'm like, okay, well, what's a rich person? And he's like, well,
damn you.
that's more successful than me. And I'm like, okay, well, why? And I'm like, tell me some stories about that. Because our logical brain knows that that's bullocks, but our subconscious lives by a set of laws. And one
it's
of
a
the
push-pull, right? Because I want it, but I think it's bad at the same time. And so I get caught in this wrestling with myself.
The wrestling ended up being, when we dug a little deeper, was through the realm of his mom. So his mom grew up in the potato famine in Ireland, and she always said, like, rich people were not good. And so you will never allow yourself to become what your family unit relationally doesn't support. So in his mind, he had a certain number target that was teetering on the brink of being a rich person. And so sabotaging, that push-pull, while simultaneously living with a partner who liked nice things, and he was feeling a ton of pressure and then also resentment because they would come home and want all these things. And he's like, I have to provide for her. I'm like, what does providing mean? He's like, I don't know. I'm like, well, we need to figure this out. And that's precisely why I believe money is in everything. It's directly and indirectly in everything, because if we bring it to the surface and ask better questions around money, we realize there's rules of the family, there's old interactions, and we get to decide in the present, are we going to give our power away to it or free ourselves with new choices? And that's ultimately what we did. And then his business took off. He had hard conversations with his partner, and they burned down the word provider because they're like, we can both provide in safe space. And so I feel like it's just something we need to name, and then we get to set ourselves free on what it looks like.
Yeah. And the other thing that I'm getting, that it feels like is very sticky and kind of clinging to a lot of our stories and history and potential with money, is shame. All that stuff around not having the conversation, and it's just my task, my role to be the provider, and not even exploring like what that could mean, or what, even how much money
you even want it.
Yeah. And then the shame around, if I become the rich person, so I'll just be rich enough, which is some weird kind of gray area. So then let's go into that a little bit. So shame around money.
Every human has it.
How do we start to approach that?
So one of the things that I really believe is a gift is really inherently creating compassion around your own nervous system with money. So what do I mean by that? Like starting to pay attention when you feel like deep dread, or your stomach drops, or you like feel your hands starting to sweat, like anything that feels like a really negative nervous system response is often somehow tied to a money event that has shame connected to it. And I think one of the most revolutionary things that I've witnessed over the last 10 years, walking people home to their money and healing it, has been this idea that we actually get to choose the shame, that the shame doesn't have to stay. And, one of my favorite trauma teachers, Gabor Mate, talks about how trauma narrows our worldview. And I very much believe the same thing to be true in our reaction to money. When it elicits a nervous system response, we go back to the age and time of some similar event, whether we can remember it or not, and we have a response to it. But often we don't feel like there's any way we can rid ourselves of it. And so one of my favorite things around money shame is the liberation of saying, like, I can choose to let this go or not. And sometimes that can feel oversimplified, and I'm never trying to oversimplify money because it's layered. But sometimes you don't realize we have a choice to let it go. I'm like, why are you holding on to that? And I don't know. And so one thing I'd love for everyone listening to remember about money shame is that what you always get to have is a choice. So when you have a nervous system response, to really allow yourself to be like, okay, I'm going to listen to my body here around this. Like, I'm feeling uncomfortable. Let me remember I'm safe. Let me explore why. because exploring the why I'm having this reaction can set us free from the next time it happens. And that can stop a chain of events that go into a money story reaction that we do not want, like the auto programming, for example. So for me, shame has to be met with compassion, and it really needs to be explored from a realm of like not pushing through, because there's no pushing through money shame. It just makes it worse. It's the curiosity of saying, like, where did this originate from? Do I need support? Who is that support? And what do I actually want on the other side of this shame, which is actually often a lot closer than it appears. And so I would refer to this as starting to take the eagle eye view in your relationship to money, whether it's big purchases, small purchases, earning, resentment, whatever it is. It's like, what is this teaching me? What is this showing me? What's the lesson here? Because ultimately what we get to remember is, even when we don't feel like we have a choice around money, there's some choice to be had. And I love to think about this idea of being a good steward with our money and creating a legacy we're really proud of. And how we do that is by defying the auto programming, defying when shame happens, to let it bubble up so that we explode. It's like, give this a voice. What is this showing me? Remembering that I'm safe, and deciding a new truth in that moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And, the big thing I'm getting there as well is, with that compassion, therefore, is like having some curiosity. Like, where is this coming from? How can I explore this? Do I have the tools to explore this? Like, I don't know, I just have this thing. I never hold on to money, or whatever it is, right? So let's get curious about that and see what it holds. And it might not be an answer in that moment, but it can certainly open the door to answers down the line.
Awareness takes us a long way, because through this exploration, for example, like sometimes if the auto response is rest and you want to go buy something, like you feel this hit to go buy something, there might have been a situation in the past where potentially parents were fighting about money, and your way you regulated your nervous system was to shop and get the endorphins from shopping. Or in my case, I had some interesting exchanges with my mom. And when I was in grade 12, about to finish high school, my mom drained my bank accounts. And so from that experience, my auto programming is to hoard money at different times. Like I don't want to spend any, like if my life gets tricky, you bet I'm spending nothing, and I'm like holding on to it. And then I go, okay, well, why am I doing this? This is, I can have compassion for a version of me from the past, but that's not going to take away my power in the present. So what is my highest self showing up with right now?
Yeah, I love that. I can have compassion, but it's not going to take away from my power in the present, right? Which is giving yourself choice and curiosity to actually explore and make a different choice, right? And what that feels like is, as you said, when my life gets a bit busy and hectic, I kind of go for, let me just hoard, and therefore create some semblance of security, and stability, which I don't seem to be experiencing externally. And that really, I think, is such a common thing. I see this idea around, money equals, and there's probably lots of things that different people could fill in after that. But, this broad idea of financial security, and the extension being more money equals more financial security. But that doesn't necessarily end up in that place, right? So when we're exploring this idea of financial security, like, what is that? How have we got to this point? Like, and we seem to be prisoners to it, because of course,
my gosh,
we need money to survive, right? And to feel secure. There's a point there, but it seems to be, we just, almost like you said earlier with some of those things, we just don't define them. So how do we approach this idea of financial security? And more is more.
You nailed that for me, because when we don't define it, it's like the goalpost moves automatically. Like often it's like, okay, when I get here, then, but we're so in a forward motion, or it's unknown and it's potentially a little fearful, or we're like, you know what, I feel like I'm going to need some more because I've got a kid doing blah, 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 and I'm not really sure. We don't put any actual intentionality behind it. So I want to use this one example. I had a client once who, we went through his net worth, and he's like, oh yeah, doing good. I'm like, cool. Describe what that means. He's like, yeah, I'm doing good. I'm like, we crunch his numbers. He's worth $50 million. I'm like, tell me, do you feel rich? And he paused for a really long time. And he's like, you know what, Selena, maybe when I hit 100 million, that'll be the time I feel rich. And I'm bringing that up, not because his answer surprised me. It's because it didn't. And it's precisely that logic, like the goalpost. Like,
yeah, you were just waiting for him to fill in the blank.
Yeah, it's like the goalpost moves. And so he was still the kid who had no money. He just now changes the group he compares himself with. He still has no money if he's hanging out with the guys who have 100 million. And the context doesn't change. And so we have to upgrade our money beliefs as we like get forward with our life. Like what I mean by this is financial security is a deeply personal conversation. Like really getting back to that eagle eye view. Like, what is your one precious life filled with? If it's on autopilot, it's often like busyness. It's not adding intentionality. Like, what is money doing to enrich our life? And a lot of those things contain a lot of layers, and it tires people. They're like, fuck it, I'm not even exploring it. But it's costing.
Yeah, so I'll just work harder and try and earn more, and then it will take care of itself.
Yeah, and that's great. Like we need to be good stewards of money. What that means is that we're not being just frivolous and not looking at it, but we don't have to be obsessively compulsive like I was, which was also unhealthy. There's some range in the middle. And so when I think about kind of my wholehearted logic and what has helped the most for me and many of my clients is deciding your own definition of financial security. Like for me personally, after getting my disease, because I worked 120 hours a week before I was diagnosed. And after, I realized time is my most precious currency. You know, my body is a gatekeeper. It teaches me things. But that time, I can't feel, I still need money, you know, but time and money have an interesting correlation. So, you know, I really invite everyone to look at like where, if you had no money as an issue, what would you be doing with your time? And then actively choosing to close the gap between now and then through choice and decision. So here's what I mean. I started just working the same as I did once I got into remission. I was like, okay, back in it. I'm working all the time. And then I got in the hospital and I was like, okay, this is not teaching me anything. And it didn't matter how much money I had. I was still doing it because I kept moving the goalpost, which almost every human does. So I needed to dig into more girth, something deeper. And I realized like, I love to travel. I love to have like time based on my own decision, not just these few hours in a day. So then I had to like upgrade my thinking. Can I earn the same amount of money with X amount of time? And I did that through my business. And then I started going, okay, well, what does travel look like? And I had to ask myself better questions. And so one thing that I really deeply believe is that we relentlessly spend on the things we love, and we relentlessly cut out money and spending on the shit we don't. And so really starting to say like, in the quality of my life, what do I gravitate towards? And so for some people, they're like, oh my gosh, give me a luxury car. That's all I want. It feels really good. And some people are like, fuck it, I don't want a luxury car. Doesn't matter. It's up to you. But you need to ask yourself those questions. It's like, oh, all I want to do is travel. Okay, well, are you traveling or are you just working and one day traveling? Like bring that intentionality forward. Start asking yourself better questions. Start by looking at your money and saying, where does resentment live? If I'm looking into my bank account and I already have anxiety, okay, what is that? Name it. Am I anxious because I feel like I'm behind? That was my story. I felt like I was behind. So I was always working hard to catch up, but there was no catching up. It was just,
catching
I was
up to
always
what
behind.
and where.
And I witnessed this often in the role of the provider for men is like, time doesn't matter. I'll just put in what needs to be put in. I'll provide for my family. Well, what are you providing for? Are you a team or is it just you? Because there's like this idea of really
Mm.
thinking about money in the relationships you hold. So if you hold money by yourself, yes, you are on your own for that duration of time. So you can build a life around what you love and bring in enriching experiences. Start looking at your money like, what's important to me? What's important to me is not feel anxious around money. Okay, well, what's an inspired action with that? Well, really sitting with someone who can help me start saving because I don't know what to do about that. Okay, meet with someone who I can feel I can ask good questions about. Meet with a certified financial planner, ask them questions, get money started and put away, automate it. Don't even look at it. Then what do you have left? Okay, what do you have left? Are you wasting your money on things that don't matter? I'm going to use a silly, obnoxious example, but it's one that's coming to my
Love these
mind.
ones.
So I wanted to take my daughter, who's 7, to Hawaii after the, like kind of lockdowns of the pandemic. I'm like, okay, let's go to Hawaii. And when I priced out this trip, I was like, oh my gosh, it's a lot of money. And then I started asking myself these questions, like, what is the optimization of my life? What feels like richness to me? And what feels like richness is a 7-hour flight, not in economy. And so I'm like, Kate, and it's obnoxious. Why am I putting my 7-year-old in a business class seat? That's not a good practical answer, but fuck it. Living a rich life has to be about what feels rich to you. And so I'm like, I'm going to book it. So we booked these business class flights, her and I can't wait for it. But then, while I'm there, I realize there's certain things I don't want to dedicate money to. Like at the end of the week, I look at the bill and I spent like $250 on bacon. And I'm like, what?
I wasn't expecting bacon to be the thing.
I know. That's why I said it's obnoxious. It's like we went out for breakfast out of convenience and I just charged it to the room. And I'm looking at the bill after going, this bacon, $250, like we could have had a whole other experience. Like we went on a boat, we looked at whales, like that didn't even cost $250. So it's a really simplified example of like, to some other people, they're like, screw business class, get the bacon. And I'm like, no, I want business class, fuck the bacon, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's up to me. But the whole point is I have to be thoughtful about it. So next time you best know we're going to be, eating breakfast in the room because it doesn't enrich my life. And she didn't care. She's 7. And so really looking at your life like that and saying like, where am I, calling my providers? Like if I haven't talked to my internet provider in 3 years, I know there's a cost optimization there. Like be relentless about saving money, but not to the point of obsession, just optimize it. And then also on the same, like that kombucha example, like if you like a $14 kombucha, it makes your fucking soul on fire to drink that thing, do it. Like here's a ridiculous example in my life as well. Like for whatever reason, I don't like making coffee at home. I really love when someone else makes it for me. And I will give myself that. It's like a daily joy that makes me really happy. But I will cut out other things that other people might feel like is not frivolous. And it doesn't fucking matter because it's up to me. And as a good steward of my money, I'm intentionally thinking about those things, not obsessing. Like when we reach the obsession category, which is what some people do when they're like, oh my gosh, I wasted this money, like the bacon wasting. It's a lesson. Let it go. Don't money.
Yeah, you can't stay there or you'll stay there.
And you're going to stay in the shame of it. Yeah. And I know how could that possibly be shame? Believe me, it can be. I've talked to many people where situations like that can become paralyzing. So trusting your nervous system, asking better questions, curious around it. Like I have nothing against bacon, but it's not going to be the driving decision in my trips going forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And, because one of the simple connections, which could have happened, but certainly that could happen in that situation is why I shouldn't have spent that money. And in that line of thinking, especially that big shouldn't, it tends to lead towards that kind of shame piece, right? Where it can spiral down, especially if we haven't become more competent at understanding money and our relationships to it, and when and why and how we spend it, and so on.
And many of us do that. I have done it many a times, but it's costing you too much peace. And so you're like, okay, I learned this about myself. The one thing about money that I feel is a like basic principle we can all kind of think about is we always feel like we have to be perfect in our money. And I opened this call by saying a recovering perfectionist, because one of the things that money affords us is the ability to fail over and over and over again. And we assign meaning to what that means. So, I glazed over, coming out of the hospital and being really busy in my career. But what I skipped over in that, only for basis of time, was that I got married and divorced within 1 year in that time frame. And that divorce cost me like $50,000 when we were getting divorced. And that was a huge shame piece for me. I was like, wow, $50,000 for 1 year of marriage. And this is going to set me back forever. And I really had to look at it by saying, like, what am I making that mean? It really narrowed my worldview on all my future decisions, because I felt behind because I was missing this $50,000. But one thing that the universe does, if you really like sit into the realm of highest self and being guided to your highest truth and making the most of your one precious life, I really believe that when you're a good steward of money, it shows up to you in unexpected ways. And so that's one of the things where you can look to the lesson and feel the lesson and let it go, like release the shame around it. And there's always situations where money shows up, and not just in my life, in clients' lives, where they're like, I released this, and then I ended up getting a random check in the mail or whatever it is. And that can sound like fluff, but it isn't. It's really choosing to be a good steward of money, which is being open to the possibilities that it brings you. Being honest with yourself around, what you're looking to money for. Is it to judge yourself? Is it to have the financial security? What is financial security? Asking yourself more thought-provoking questions than that, to say, one of the things that I feel like, Mike, is that you might need X amount of money to retire, and I might need double that because of my spending history. But does that make one of us better? No. It's who can ask thought-provoking questions to themselves to say, is this feel good to me? And can I make the most of it until then? Because I've had clients retire and get dementia and never enjoy any of it. And I've had clients who've been in retirement and run out of money, and come to me then. And so being a good steward of money is looking at your past and unlocking your power for the present to live a really liberated life in richness, so that security is with you always. You're looking for lessons or upgrades, but it's not a destination. It's allowing yourself to be on a journey with money. A relationship with money is every day showing up to it with intention, asking better questions, just like you would in a regular relationship.
Yeah, I love that. And, part of that, it could be X for me and 2X for you, but either way, the point is that it's accurate for me and it's specific to me. And there's that invitation to perhaps, to your much earlier point of like, it was all externally based. Like, actually, I got to internalize this so it's mine. And there's authorship there. The other thing there to security is, defining it. If we're looking at, let's say, romantic relationships, popular terminology these days is around attachment styles and, anxious and avoidant. And these are the things that I'm also hearing in, the spender and the saver. I'm sure there's some very solid parallels there. But, one of the ideas, one of the aims, let's say, is to move to a place of being securely attached. And for me, there's a direct correlation here to money, financial security. It's an easy thing to keep saying, well, what the fuck is it? But more so, and to the guy who had 50 million, will you feel rich at the end? No, not at 100 million. And what it sounds like there is, I'm hoping more financial security will allow me to feel secure, but that's not going to band-aid over an insecurity of mine. And so into this idea that if I have enough money, then I will feel enough.
Yeah.
And if something like that is at the heart of my insecurity, then just more money isn't going to get there. So can you take us into how you see this play out? Essentially the idea of enough. I mean, we use it in so many ways in our life. You spoke about time. If I don't have enough time, there's so much correlation there, but often at the heart of that is me feeling like I am enough or not enough.
I did not feel enough when I looked to my external, pressures and my never ending workaholism. It was to get someone to notice what I was doing. and I witnessed this often in money, just as you had eloquently stated about worthiness in money. And society has taught us that money is power, and there's always a new level of it. So it becomes like a chasing of worth instead of inherently seeing our worth. And then that's when we get really specific around richness. So to me, this is foundational in saying, I get to lead myself to the discussion of worthiness. And part of what I believe is what worthiness around money is creating safety for yourself in areas you've never felt valued before in your life, and really starting to say, like, who gets a seat at my decision-making table around this? And so for me, a lot of it was like, I'm waiting for someone to notice how much effort I'm putting in, but I didn't notice it for myself. You know, really starting to say, like, what does leading myself in life look like? And it was upgrading boundaries. It was becoming specific around the things that I want. And that's precisely the example I referenced with the gentleman who's had 50 million and was like, one day when I get 100, that same external validation, like, unless you can foundationally say worth is me leading myself to my highest truth and walking myself home. That's why I use that expression, walking myself home with money, is recognizing that I am more than enough. I'm not behind. I can make good decisions. I can trust myself to be a good steward of money. And worthiness and trust and respecting my past and still deciding to upgrade my decisions because I want to make the most of my life is really coming around this idea that worthiness gets to be the curiosity of creating security around places we don't feel worthy, and to unplug from the illusion that more money will give us more worth, because it never will. And so the whole concept of being a good steward of money is saying, let me explore my own emptiness, not around money, but the things surrounding money. And for me, it looked like I was confident when people were watching, but could I sit alone and decide I enjoyed my own company? You know, when I enjoyed my own company, I started realizing, wow, like, I'm not reaching so much. You know, if I'm being too busy, again, like, I'm distracting myself from who I am. So learning to give yourself compassion and create safety for where you've never been valued, to me, is the stepping stone to being a good steward of money. And ultimately saying worth is non-negotiable here. You know, I'm not looking for anyone to give me worth. I claim it. I lead myself through it. And so what does that look like for me? And that's often when we go to the past, where there's been situations where there's events that happen that we get to reclaim the truth around our worth. And when I want to speak about the one piece around financial security and getting specific about it, the beauty of worth is giving yourself permission to change your mind as well. So this idea, like, you know, I don't know truly how much it's going to be for me to retire, but I'm doing everything I need to live in fully until then, so that I'm not reaching a destination. It's enjoying the journey. So I'm going to sit with my financial dream team. I'm going to ask those questions of, like, okay, what do we think I'm going to need to retire? Because I do like to spend money, but worth in the moment gives me peace in the moment, so that I'm not living in the anxiety of, will I have enough? It is, I will always be enough, and I trust myself to get there. To me, there's a very distinctive difference.
Yeah, I love that. And it's you know, it really is asking the letting go of where I have placed my worth externally, you know, because I see this for so many guys. It can come about in many ways. Often that big provider energy, it all goes here. And, you know, I have worth when I have kind of collected enough worth, right? Or created, you know, wealth. And I have no value if I haven't, or I will have value when, right? And this kind of some of that language that you've used already. So how do we actually challenge that?
So one of the things that I love to do is, in my day-to-day life, say, like, do I feel like I can trust my decisions, or do I need other people to weigh input? Or when I'm sitting with the worth, Like when I look at the numbers and I change them, do I feel different? That's another example. Like if all of your worth was to go away now, or all of your debt was to go away, are we inflating the reality of who we are going to become versus who we really are? And stripping away this concept that money will change us. Because what I learn very clearly is money is an amplifier for exactly who we already are. And so if you're already good, you get to be more caring and giving with money. And if you're kind of a dick, you're likely to be more of a dick, you know? So when you're sitting in this worthiness, really evaluating all the pieces of yourself that you're most proud of, and all of the areas where you're like, you know what, this feels a little sticky. Let me clean up the energy on this. What do I mean by that? Like for me, I really didn't know how to be alone with my time because it was always filled with things. So I got back to
120
joy.
hours a week because it doesn't leave much more.
Yeah, I slept on my couch, like in my office. Like, so I would say, like, what does it feel like to walk in nature? What does that feel like? And to really start paying attention to when my soul felt peaceful. And I really believe for all of us, if we feel this desire, if it's in our heart for a reason, it's meant for us. And that's really like worthiness walking. So if you have this idea, like you want to ask for a raise, or you want to change jobs and do something else, to explore what that could look like, to give yourself permission to explore life untethered, not just as it's always been, or the next step of life looks like this, because it's always clues for me around worthiness that we're just living someone else's version of a life rather than our own. And to sit in the truth of like, what feels freeing to me, what feels exciting to me, what feels like joy to me, asking those questions, because that helps us decide, you know, what makes sense. Because so many people are like, you know what, I just need a raise. I need a raise in my job. Everything will be better. And if we don't,
just more money, there's more money. Yeah,
more money doesn't create any clarity. It just, we might spend more, we might be more unconscious, we might even cause more fights. Sometimes it is more money because the numbers add up and we need enough to reach our goals, but usually it isn't. And so
and if you're in a state of actual survival, like you're struggling to keep the lights on, so to speak. But also what I'm really getting in that is, so fucking specify that, like actually get clear on what those numbers are so you can have some power in that, right? And then you can actually know, like, if you need more money, exactly what that is and where that goes to. And then beyond that, some of those other things might come in, the fights, the spending it, the not holding on to it, all of that.
And it doesn't have to be like an attachment to a number. It's like, okay, I know that this is what I desire, so let me pick inspired actions that get me closer to this. So for example, if you're like, I love my job, but I know I'm underpaid. Well, leading yourself in your worth can look like this. It could be doing some market research to see what else people are being compensated, or it might look like I'm going to book a meeting with my boss and advocate for myself and negotiate a higher salary. And if they don't give it to me, that I really do take inspired action to find a new job. Or if you've really been wanting to create a company and you're like, I'm just scared, you can create the company while you're still at the job. Like, it doesn't just have to be about the numbers. It's chasing this concept of money is numbers will never set us free. It'll never show security. What it is this idea that we can walk ourselves home in knowing who we are, trusting our choices, being curious about what's in us. And if it feels off kilter, to be like, I know I can sort this out. I can upgrade it, because just saying I want $2 million means fucking nothing. But if you specify what your life looks like along the way, where you're like, you know what, I'd love to be able to take a year sabbatical and travel the world with my wife. What would that actually cost? I have a client right now. She met me a couple of years ago at a conference, and she's like, I just want to start a business and move to New York. And she's like, I can't wait for it. I'm like, okay, so what are you doing to get there? She's like, I don't know. It's just a dream I have. I'm like, okay, well, if it's just a dream, it's never going to come to fruition unless you get really specific. I'm like, tell me why New York is the place. She's like, you just watch her whole body language light up. She's like, it's the energy there. I just feel at home there. Like, I really need to get there. So I said to her, I'm like, okay, let's build a specific plan to get you there. What is it going to be? And she's like, well, I can't get away from my company. I'm like, why? She's like, I'm in the business. So we had to first work on her getting out of the business, having more team. And now she's literally in New York. But if it just stays something that is a vision of yours, it doesn't have to be numbers. It should be the life you've always wanted. If then statements never come to fruition from a place of wholeness. It's just that external validation. If you're like, I desire this, let me choose it every day and relentlessly commit to being a good steward of the money, spending on the things that light you up. So you keep your nervous system in a place of like, oh, I know what it feels like to have peace in my life around money. And then not overspending on the shit you don't need keeps your numbers more whole. So you have more dedicate to what you really want. So to me, while money is numbers, it's actually what lives behind the numbers that matter. The feeling that comes up is actually a belief that you can choose to keep or upgrade. And that's where you end up walking in the richness of your life, because worthiness is not a question or an option. And being a good steward of money means I can decide what I'm going to do with this. Do I want to be a provider? Do I want to choose legacy? Like, I ask myself better questions, thereby living a higher quality of life.
Beautiful. I have got 16 more questions that I feel I could dive into, but that would probably be doing them a disservice. Given that the time that we have, that feels like a beautiful place for us to step off and to revisit and perhaps reinforce some of that language, right? Which is like, as you said, walking home to money, or for you, walking people there, being a good steward for money, which I think for me, one of the things I'm getting, and amongst everything that you've shared, is it is an invitation to first of all address my relationship to myself, and therefore by extension money, so that I can even start to grapple with the idea of what would be me being a good steward for money even look and feel like.
Yes. And what could you feel free in your money? That is liberation, because it all looks unique. I could come on here and say, like, do these 5 things, just like we could Google.
Yeah.
And unless you're
give me the things.
Yeah. Like, unless you're a specific personality, you could get those 5 things and feel completely empty. What I'd rather do is learn to explore who you are, what lights you up, and actively choose that every day. Like, defining your richest form of life is not just the numbers. It's like, for me, for example, time, all those things. But what's required is for you to say, like, why do I feel this way? Like, when you're in it, there's something from the past it's teaching me. Let me unlock my power now so that I can live life to the fullest. Like, I always love to think in those 3 time frames. And even if it's, something you're interested in, here's what I've learned the hard way. You have to be ready. Like, I needed the 2x4 from the universe, right? You have to be ready. So you can't just do this for other people. Like, of course, if you have kids and you're like, look, I want to create a good legacy for your kids, you could create accounts and do it, but it doesn't mean you're actually living an enriched life. So to me, what I like to think about is more so like, what can I get behind the feelings, the excitement? And I have to be ready to walk in this. I want a better relationship. I want a better quality of life. And I'm so excited to do that with a partner or a spouse, or excited to do that for my kids. But ultimately, like, your worthiness is your own, and you can't make decisions about your relationship to money for other people, because when shit gets hard, and it will, you're going to give up and fall into old habits. Like, the realest, honest change around money is letting go of perfection, looking to your mistakes to say, what is this going to teach me? Let me be a good steward of money, which is like, I'm a human and I get to have these feelings that teach me something so I can choose better tomorrow. And I get to have fun. Like, the last thing I want to say is, but we take money too seriously. Like, it's not life or death. In some cases, yes, it is. But for the most part, money is this dance we have for the rest of our life, and we decide how we show up to it. So have some joy. Like, if you're saving everything and you have no joy in your life, which I've had many clients do, like, your life fucking sucks. Being a good steward of money is like, I'm going to make the most of what I have. Yeah. I'm going to be present to the life I want. And it doesn't all cost money. The thing with money is it's in everything. It's in the hard moments, in the joy moments, and you decide what you're making that mean. So to me, freedom with money is I get to be myself. I get to be present to the life I want and free myself from conditioning of the past that isn't my own, so I can walk in a better legacy going forward.
I love that. Thank you, Selena. There's one word that's really coming, there's many, but there's one that's really landing for me now that I think is such a beautiful distinction, and that is richness. We've often had this idea, coming back to old stories, of being rich, as you said to that guy who had $50 million. And there's a really subtle but powerful invitation with richness and enriching. And that to me already feels like totally different. And so I think that's something that we can certainly go away and explore, as I will, and as I'm sure we'll discuss at some point. Selena, thank you so much. Now, if someone wants to find out more about you, perhaps if there's anything that you might have available for them in terms of resources, what can you tell us?
Come hang out with me on Instagram. That's where I'm most active, selina.gray. You can also go to my website, selinagray.com, shoot me a DM. I've got lots of courses, I've got masterminds, all the things. But ultimately, what I invite you to do is just when you're ready, claim it. And don't be scared to get into the depths of it. One thing that I've witnessed is that all the ideas of feeling behind or making money wrong can be gone when we decide shame is no longer a part of it. And this whole idea of redefining richness, to me, it's revolutionary. We get to choose who we are in our power and walk forward with it. And that feels like freedom to me. So what does that mean for you? Small changes turn into big changes. It creates a ripple effect. And I just invite you to really ask yourself, is this the relationship with money I want? And if not, what feels like an upgrade? Continue to ask yourself that question, and it will change your life.
Just leaving some space for that to land. Thank you, Selena. I love that. And we'll be exploring that question. It's the beauty of this is it's the morning for me. So I've got a full day that will be bouncing around my head. Selena Gray, thank you so much for coming on the show. You absolute legend.
I appreciate you so much. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to championing everyday men and supporting you in getting more from life, love, and the everyday. If this podcast has benefited you, if you enjoyed this, then my invitation is to share this with a man that you think will also benefit from this and enjoy this. Remember, please, wherever you find your podcast, you like us, subscribe to us, click download first, leave us a review. All those things both make sure you get all the updates when they come in, and it supports us in getting this podcast in front of more everyday men that could use it. Until next time, I've been Mike Campbell. Remember to build that legendary integrity. And remember, everyday men, we thrive when we are championed, when we are supported, when we are appreciated and recognized for who we choose to be in the world. Here is my invitation to both show up and be that everyday legend, and to continue to champion the everyday men in your life.